everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the best podcast in the world, the Awakener podcast. Not because I'm biased, but because I think the material is great, and it's explained to you a lot of what people do not understand, that fundamentally this is a war against the Western world. Number one, it's a war against the USA, because they want to break the largest military-industrial complex that exists and the largest, most powerful nation, and thus they can remake the entire Western world against our will. This is really about a covert Soviet agenda. This is about infiltrating the Western world through major organizations that are spending billions and billions of dollars. They're very resourceful. They're spending money on protests in the media, and they're also promoting money on organizations basically meant to change our way of thinking. So to convert us from being a Western nation that did not have anything to do with communism whatsoever in the 1980s, to look at us now. Everybody's celebrating Palestine and everything is so wonderful. And they've turned us from within, ladies and gentlemen. It's very simple. If you look at the history of this, it's very easy to understand. Like I've told you before, the events that are unfolding today are because George Soros and his organizations are tied to a covert RICO case regards to cooperation with the Soviet Union, aka the Iron Curtain collapse is fake. Number two, George Soros and his organizations, as you know, they infiltrated the USA as early as 1993. As soon as George H.W. Bush left office, surprise, Bill Clinton's presidency. We've talked about, obviously, blackmail and why that's going on and why blackmail is key for a president to do something an enemy nation would want to do. And then, obviously, these organizations going to expand all over the Western world. Obviously, they expanded all over the Western world because after the USA was completely infiltrated, they then put a Soviet plant, Barack Obama, into the White House. This person basically orchestrated the takeover completely of the Western world and obviously nations like the UK, Canada, France, and a bunch of other nations. And this is why we're having the problems we're in. Fundamentally, a lot of people in the Western world are completely oblivious of this and what's going on. Number one, because they're completely brainwashed by the mainstream media and the left-wing media that completely tells them that A, nothing is going on, or B, this guy who's doing this podcast here is completely crazy. When actually it's very easy to do any kind of basic research on your phone or your laptop, and you can easily come to the truth. Did George Soros operate in the Eastern Soviet bloc? Yes. Did he spend a bunch of money to fund dissidents and push away Soviet propaganda? Yes. Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. So why is it that Russia is interested in bulldozing Ukraine now, but they're not interested in bulldozing Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia back in the day? And why is it that George Soros would turn around and then through his media conglomerate and his money, feed the Western world communism after he quote-unquote collapsed the Iron Curtain? It's all a lie, ladies and gentlemen. They have infiltrated us up to basically the eyeballs. We are in a very difficult situation here in the Western world because our government, they know specifically what they're doing. Not everybody. So I've talked about in politics how the left wing, most people who are there right now are ideologues, which means they're interviewed, they want to run for parliament, they want to run for government, and they're chosen basically by how stupid they are. They're chosen by how much of a communist they are, their belief structure. Okay, how do you feel about climate change? Oh, climate change is so bad and this and this. Boom. You believe the propaganda, they are put into place. Not everybody knows what's going on. The conspiracy is actually much smaller than you think it is, but it does involve obviously a hidden military Soviet agenda that comes along with it, and its purposes is to basically have a war. Yes, they want to have a war where they want to institute control, and they want to arise a situation where they will give handouts out and the Western world will trade its freedom for a loaf of bread. So how does this all relate to anything that's going on, specifically my nation of Canada? I've told you from the very beginning that Canada is the enemy. Why is that? Canada is run by this communist conspiracy, which is George Soros. And if you look at the history of infiltration into this nation kind of started infiltrating us as early as obviously the US was infiltrated as well, with various organizations being set up and sponsored and money flowing obviously from the US for its end goal. But they never really controlled our government until obviously 2015. That's when, as you know, and I've talked about many times, Harper was kicked out of office because obviously the Chinese government, the US Tides Foundation, which is George Soros, and a bunch of other foreign entities spent a bunch of money to get Harper out of office. They were supposed to have Trudeau in office. Now, I've talked about blackmail. I don't want to get too much into that, what I think Trudeau was being blackmailed or where the case may be. But I do want to explain to you kind of the agenda that they had for Canada, why the government is doing what it's doing, and once again recap, obviously, Carney and Trudeau, and whether people think they're going to vote themselves out of this nonsense. Now, if you think that you're going to vote yourself out of this nonsense in Canada, it's It's not going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. So this guy, Carney, has come along, as I've discussed before. He came out of nowhere, mainly because Trudeau was unpopular. Now, there was electoral riding that happened, obviously, in Toronto, and this is a long-time Liberal stronghold, and this stronghold was lost by the Liberals to the Conservatives. First time in 30 or 40 years. I can't remember. All of a sudden, the Liberals knew they were going to lose with Trudeau, and in comes this new man. Carney then becomes, obviously, economic advisor. He then gets briefed on everything Trudeau had to do, and then you could literally see what happened right before the election, with obviously Trudeau announcing that he was stepping down, and this guy Carney being put in front of the camera. Now, these billions of dollars for Soros and his organizations told you that this guy was so wonderfully popular, he was going to win the election, don't even show up, it's going to be great, and they marched him like he was so wonderful. It was just gifted. There's people inside the Liberal Party that were fighting, obviously, their election. I can't remember the name of the individual. Obviously, the insider would know. I know the insider's probably listening to this right now. The insider would know this guy. It doesn't come up to my brain, but this guy's in an active fight with the Liberal Party of Canada in regards to his membership. He was kicked out because he was running. Everything was staged. It was all fake. All the bots on Twitter or X, all the the liberal media, all the news, all told you that Carney was the gifted person. And this guy is here in office. Now, what is this guy here in office for? Well, this requires us to go back in our way of thinking. So what was the government going to do? Well, they were going to set up a war, and their main element of seizure is through what's called a communist revolution. So our government here in Canada and Soros and his organizations are not leading us, how do I say this? They're not here to basically take over control. They're here to set the stage for the complete takeover of control, which means they're here to institute or bring Canada along and institute poverty and a bunch of other things so that eventually a revolution happens after something bad happens in the world. Now, I've told you that this is all related to basically a North Korean EMP, cutting of the electrical grid, and things of that nature. Now, the government is waiting for this event to happen because they think that this EMP attack is going to go down in America, and America is going to be down for the count, and there's going to be attempted communist revolution in America. So this government believes that the Soviets are going to try basically an internal takeover. What do I mean by Soviets? The communists. So everybody infiltrated in the United States of America who's a foreign enemy agent from whatever nation is going to be here to basically have a war in Washington, D.C. to seize control of America. Then they can say, well, we don't need the Supreme Court anymore. We don't need anything we put in power. This is the way the rules are from now on. Now, Yuri Bezmenov, if you watch his video on YouTube, talked about this. He talked about a violent changeover of power where laws are basically just thrown away. And this is what happened in 1917. And obviously in Russia, they had a communist revolution, they seized control, and there's no more laws anymore. This is the way that the government operates, and you're either in or you're out. So the government of Canada thinks it knows this. It thinks that it knows that North Korea and its EMPs are coming. Obviously, there's going to be a war with the USA and obviously China and Russia, but they're positioning themselves, ladies and gentlemen, to basically stay in control and power during this time. Okay, let's put two and two together for a second. Leading up to this war, obviously, with America going to war with Russia and China, and obviously all this happening, the government of Canada is not interested in spending any money on NATO or any military equipment whatsoever. Our military here in Canada is absolutely laughable, to say the least. I don't think America fears Canada's military in the slightest, nor should any foreign nation. But all of a sudden, the government of Canada is going, hey, wait a second. Trump's in power here. Maybe things are not going to turn out the way they were going to turn out. And maybe everybody's going to know about George Soros and everybody's going to know about what we were doing in Canada. So what do we have to do here? They're spending a bunch of money on military, and I talked to you about this in my previous podcasts. I told you how they were going to align themselves with the European Union and start new defense treaties. They're going to spend more money on NATO because what they're doing is instituting a government where they can literally say we are in charge and not be removed from office. It seems pretty scary. But if you think about it, ladies and gentlemen, if the truth is going to come out that indeed George Soros was working for the Russians, that indeed this ideology has infiltrated the Western world through the United States of America, because it's infiltrated big corporations and obviously money laundering and all this stuff in the media, then people are going to understand that this was all null and void. Everything that's happened in Canada since 2015 is null and void because essentially George Soros is working for enemy nation states. Now it's all making sense for a second, isn't it? So if the government knows this, they have to have some kind of way to seizing control and keeping everything. This is why they're passing their agenda, their laws. So a lot of people are saying, well, they don't want people talking about it for whatever reason. Wrong. They know there's going to be a war. That the government, Soros and his groups, and these people who actually know about the Soviet agenda, like Vladimir Putin, probably Zelensky, all these people are higher up. They absolutely know there's going to be a giant war. There's going to be a flash war for seizure of control of the power from the US-backed industrial complex. After this, they're going to attempt to set up their government. So they know all this. So this is why they're orchestrating a plan to stay in control regardless of what happens. This is why I theorized to you back in the day, and why maybe it'll make a lot of sense to you now, that the government of Canada was looking to turn itself against the USA. And Carney's specific agenda, although he's acting so nice and wonderful and he seems very timid versus Trump, his actually agenda is to radicalize the population of Canada against the USA. Well, the reason why things have turned out so badly, and the reason why we haven't had any trade deals, is because Trump is a bully. The USA is now all of a sudden a bully, and we need to go to various lengths and to do various things to secure our sovereignty, ladies and gentlemen. Not like we never needed the USA to protect us before, or we need the USA to protect us from a thermonuclear exchange between Russia, China, and the USA. Because we're powerless, ladies and gentlemen. So this is where everything is going. It's going to be very interesting, I'll tell you this. The things that are going to happen in the future, what I think are going to happen very rapidly, are going to make a lot of sense to people who listen to this podcast and who can keep up with my material. Like I told you from the beginning, I think Carney is positioning himself to bring the Chinese government as a de facto Chinese government here on Canadian soil. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, the government of Canada with Carney will still be the face of this operation, but realistically, covert Chinese operations will be happening all over the country. So think about it for a second. If the government of Canada and China and Russia think that they're going to do an EMP attack from North Korea on the US and bring the whole thing down, and they're going to seize power, therefore Canada would kind of be a front for this global hub in this situation against the USA, which means that they're going to need a bunch of military technology. They're going to need auto building centers to build, obviously, military weapons, and they're going to need an outpost, and Canada is that outpost. So don't be surprised if Carney all of a sudden goes, oh, we need pipelines, ladies and gentlemen. And don't be surprised if all of his Marxists inside the Liberal Party reject him for this, because you know what? They all think that their socialist agenda is all about bringing climate change to power and all these wonderful things, when they all get duped in the end and they realize, oh, this is actually for war, this is actually for control, and our government doesn't care about oil and doesn't care about natural gas when it comes to beating Russia and China in a war. But if it comes to America, or going against America in a war, that all of a sudden we're going to care about this. Very, very dangerous time to be around, ladies and gentlemen, especially with obviously the government passing legislation saying that, well, you know what? This guy here in his house doing this Awakener podcast can't even have an opinion about what is going on because this is dangerous. Well, like, listen, the fact of the matter is I'm either right or I'm crazy. If I'm right, I should have a right to speak out about it. And even if I'm crazy, I should still have a right to speak out about it, because we all have a right to question our government. This is what's going on in Canada, ladies and gentlemen. So as nice as Carney seems, and he seems like he's powerless versus Trump to do nothing, don't take these people at face value. They're very, very evil. And what they're planning on doing is, like I said, just to recap, they know that there's going to be a war between Russia, China, and the USA. They know that the East is going to attempt a seizure of control over the U.S. complex that has had the upper hand in this, obviously, this arm wrestle since 1945. And this is going to be a rapid change in everything, a rapid change in ideology, a rapid change in how they treat allied nations, literally a rapid change in everything in the world. This is called their seizure of government, or their communist revolution, which will be done by force. Afterwards, they'll have a period of normalization where they look to get rid of people who go against these views. So Canada is positioning itself, number one, to recap, is to be a force after this war to basically assist in the final destruction of the USA. They're also planning, because if a war happens and they get caught, to stick together, which means the European Union, which is backed by George Soros, which is this fake organization put in charge of all these nations in Europe and subverts all their national rights, can go, oh, no, we're not leaving, because all of a sudden we have all this defense, we have all this military power, and we have all these people. And lastly, to radicalize the population and to keep them stupid, to keep them not questioning anything that's going on. It's a war, ladies and gentlemen. I said it from the beginning. Everybody just, they can't get it. This is going to be an epic few years. That's all for now. Go to theawakener.ca. Take care.